Hello and welcome again to this edition of Capitol Dateline. I'm your host, Brad Swanson, coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital. While our legislature's out, the governor is in the crucible of where these bills will come, and we have our very own Jim Saunders, executive editor of the News Service of Florida, here to join us and tell us what's happening in the capital and across Florida. Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we are back in it, right? It seems like while the legislature's out, all the action's going before the governor for the most part, so let's jump right in. We are all waiting on pins and needles to see when that budget's going to get sent to the governor, and then what is he going to do with it?
Well, we think it's going to be sent to him pretty soon. Then he's got a couple weeks to take action. But I mean, there is a ton of speculation about what he may do, what he may veto, and whether it's going to necessitate a special session to undo or try to undo or address whatever he does.
Right.
You know, the big issues are education funding. I think that's the thing to watch. I think that's what everybody is sort of wondering what he's going to do. There are a couple issues. One of which is the school funding formula, the way that money is distributed to public schools.
Yeah.
It didn't get a whole lot of increase this year per student, and there are a lot of school districts and a lot of people unhappy with the legislature over that. And they're urging the governor to veto that part of the budget. And that's a huge part of the budget, a very important part of the budget. And if he were to veto that, it would require coming back and readdressing it. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of question.
Right.
There's also another bill that technically is outside, well, it's sort of linked to the budget, but it has like about $400 million in it. That is a lot of priority issues of House Speaker Richard Corcoran, and that part of that bill, you know, also has been controversial. Partly because of the way it was put together. It was rolled out in the last few days of session, and it also does have some controversial pieces to it. So there has been a lot of urging of the governor to veto that. So if he were to do that,
So those are two big line items. I mean,
that's a lot of money. I mean, you know, the school funding formula is billions of dollars, and this bill is $400 million. There's also folks like the state colleges system. They want their part of the budget vetoed because they didn't, you know, get what they wanted either. The universities do very well in this budget, but the state colleges do not. So they're urging a veto of their portion of the budget. So there's all these moving parts, but they're big parts. They're not small issues in the realm of the budget. So I think everybody's kind of watching the governor to see you know, what he's going to do. But if he vetoes, again, the public school portion or this you know, linked bill, I think it's pretty likely that they would come back.
right. Plus, you've got a lot of other line item probably candidates that the governor, you know, could be looking at.
You know, every year he vetoes. Well, he and other governors pretty much veto use their line item veto power to take out other issues. So there's that normal process as well. I think you got to also keep in mind the governor's pretty unhappy with the House right now. You know, the governor's spent months and months and months trying to get money for Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida, and was largely rejected by the House. So he doesn't really probably has the warmest feelings as he takes up his veto pen about some of the things the legislature has done. And that could play a part in this. You know, I don't anticipate that the House Speaker, Richard Corcoran, is going to give any ground on funding for Enterprise Florida, which is zero. You know, they don't get any money that the governor wanted for economic incentives in this budget. I can't imagine the Speaker giving ground on that. But, you know, at this point, the ball is will be in the governor's court as soon as he gets the budget. Then, you know, the legislature will have to react. The Senate and the governor have been on fairly decent terms this session, so I'm not sure that the Senate priorities would be in bigger jeopardy.
Well, let's think about the budget. So the budget's the big item that everyone's waiting for, but there's a couple of other key issues that have been moving around, a little bit of action here and there, but medical marijuana is getting a ton of press across the board, and people are calling for that special session and really begging the process to not let the government entity make the rules.
Right. Well, it's funny because, it was one of those issues that you and I talked through session. I thought that this was an easily resolvable issue. I mean, that they could cut a deal and get it done. And they didn't. And they went home. And then all of a sudden after session, all of them were talking about, well, we need to come back and have a special session to resolve this. So, basically they need to pass they want to pass a law to carry out the constitutional amendment that broadly legalized medical marijuana. I mean, we're talking, maybe 400,000, 500,000 people in the coming years are estimated to be able to get medical marijuana. So the law would put in place the regulations and the structure for how that would work. The House and Senate couldn't come to agreement on it. And so they went home and now the ball is in the court of the Department of Health, which is starting the process of putting together the regulations with the absence of a statutory law to essentially guide them along the way. I think a lot of people are concerned about that. The Department of Health has had a lot of problems in implementing less expansive medical marijuana over the last few years. So, I think there's a lot of people saying the legislature should grab this thing and work it out so that it isn't an agency decision that, probably is going to lead to all sorts of challenges. Well, and, but the House and Senate need to come to some sort of leadership needs to come to some sort of agreement before they come back and try to work it out again.
Well, it's pretty interesting. I saw an opinion about the authority of the state agency to do this, and it's actually constitutional. So it hypothetically, at least the potential ruling I saw was supersedes any constraint or mandated constraint that they would have by a legislative edict, and they could really go broad and wild because it's literally coming straight out of the Constitution.
Well, I believe it's July 3rd is when the Department of Health would have to put out the initial proposal, then they would take effect a few months later. But, this is all sort of a Wild West frontier here in Florida at this point. Right. I mean, in terms of how to carry this out. There are other states have done it, but, there's all sorts of competing interests, one of which is a whole lot of people want these licenses to sell the stuff because they think they can make a lot of money. Right. But local governments are concerned. Because some of them don't want to have medical marijuana dispensaries. There's questions of how many dispensaries there should be out there. There's a lot of issues involved here. And, but one of the oldest sort of sayings around Tallahassee is you don't come back for a special session unless you got a deal. Right. So, unless the House and Senate leaders can work something out, at least the framework of a deal, I don't know what good it does to come back and squabble like they did during the legislative session. So.
Well, that's pretty interesting. So let's take a look at, so that was unresolved, but the legislature did pass a bill on whiskeys and wheaties, meaning allowing retailers to sell liquor on the same shelves as food, but that just got vetoed by the governor. What happened there?
Well, the governor, it was an interesting veto message. I mean, this issue is whether to get rid of a law that I think was passed in 1934, it was in the 1930s, that requires liquor stores to be essentially standalone facilities. Target and Walmart particularly came in and lobbied heavily to eliminate that law, to allow them to sell hard liquor in their stores with groceries and other products they sell. The legislature passed that repeal, but in the House it was 58 to 57. I mean, this is really close. I believe the Senate was 21-17. Again, really close stuff. It was very controversial. The governor gets the bill, and he did veto it, which in some ways, the governor's anti-regulation, free markets, so on. So you would think that repealing this law would play into those arguments. On the other side, though, were a lot of independent liquor store owners, ABC Fine Wine, which has liquor stores all over the state. They argued that by allowing Target and Walmart and some of these big retailers to sell liquor would hurt their businesses and essentially drive them out of business, say they can't compete on a volume basis like that. So the governor's veto message sort of fell that way. Right. He said basically that, he's looked at it and he's concerned about the impact on small businesses. It was sort of interesting. I think one of the other issues out there that it's a little bit hard to quantify, but Speaker Corcoran wanted this bill, and I I wonder whether when it came time for the governor to, if he's sort of 50-50 on the issue anyway, he's not happy with Speaker Corcoran. So that may have been a factor in this equation. But it was a noisy debate, and I mean the folks, the group, the Target, Walmart folks side of things, we're already sort of hinting that they're going to bring this issue back. I don't think it's dead. Questions whether it would come back next year during election year, I don't know. But sometimes these things take a few years.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, all right, so let's take it out of the Capitol, but something that definitely has huge ramifications. Senator Artiles resigned during session, opening up a Senate seat, which these are the prized possessions, if you will, of the political process. What's happening in that seat? Who's filed? Who's getting ready to run? What's going on?
Well, qualifying is this week, and then special primary is late July, and then the special general election is in late September. This is going to be it's going to be a lot of money poured into this race, a lot of attention focused on this race. It's in Miami-Dade County, and really, if you look at the numbers, it's sort of it's become a Democratic district. But Senator Artiles last year is a Republican, and he won the seat fairly handily. But he got in some trouble because of some kind of a tirade he had publicly and how he handled it, and he resigned. So there's really, both sides are interesting races. On the Republican side, State Representative Jose Felix Diaz, who's been a very influential House member, most recently has been chairman of the Commerce Committee, excuse me. He's planning to run. Also planning to run is former Senator Alex Diaz de la Portilla. He's a Republican. Right. He comes from a very prominent political family in Miami. He was in the Senate. His brother was in the Senate. They've been his family members on the county commission down there, the school board. So that's looking like a really hot race on the Republican side. Right. On the Democratic side, also is interesting. Annette Taddeo, who was the unsuccessful running mate with Charlie Crist for governor in 2014, she's running on the Democratic side, as is former state rep Anna Rivas Logan. There are some other candidates who are not as well known, but both parties want this seat, and they both think they can win this seat. Right. So, once you get through the primaries, I think there's going to be a whole lot of attention. It's an off year. Yeah. It's the summertime. It's Miami.
Well, you had that other impact on that district that it was a largely Hispanic district, and on that breakdown in the last election, you had a Hispanic versus an African American. This time, you've got Hispanics lining up on both sides. So. I think the Democrats are arguing that it's going to perform more towards the D now that they've got.
Yeah, I mean that is the in terms of the makeup of the district is sort of unusual. While it votes Democratic, has leaned Democratic in its voting recently, it is very heavily Hispanic, and Republicans had Artiles, who's Hispanic, and the Democrats had Dwight Bullard, who's African American. It was all part of the redistricting process before last year's election, so it got reshuffled. But the Democrats, I think, if they can. In these races, though, you got to figure the Republicans are going to put a ton of money into it. Yeah. I mean, these Senate, as you alluded to, these Senate seats are individually pretty valued and treasured at this point. So each seat is a battleground in these swing districts. So, and the Republicans are going to have the advantage of money. That's for sure. The question is whether the Democrats can get the grassroots out and who their candidate is in the general. We've already seen State Rep Daisy Baez was planning to run for that seat. She's dropped out of the race. There was some controversy about where she lived down at, whether she lives in her House district. Kind of blew up, and she dropped out of the race. She cited family reasons, but I'm not sure. Most people think that was the homestead issue was probably a factor.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, those races are going to be big. So if you're in Tallahassee or you're part of a group that writes checks towards campaigns on the left or the right, the calls are coming in twice. It's coming in for the specials, and then it's going to come in for the standard 18
Well, and the other thing that this isn't probably as much of a partisan issue, but there's going to have to be a special election to replace Diaz in the House as well. So there's going to be an election in in that House District 116 as well. Now, again, the Republicans have been pretty strong there over the years with him and others. So, I'm not sure it's a partisan issue, but if they have a contested primary there, there could be some money flying into that race as well.
Well, and you got an Orlando special election as well, so we'll stay tuned for all of those.
Has been appointed appeals court judge, so it's later in the process this year, but there's going to be a special election there, and it looks like the Republican side could be fairly competitive.
Well, I tell you, the specials are the ones that throw everybody for a loop because it's crazy enough, but try to plan for a special as well. Okay, so let's shift away from campaigns and the legislative bills, and let's go to the Florida Supreme Court. There's some folks petitioning the Supreme Court to take up a case. Is that correct? And it's Palm Beach's school district suing the state of Florida, right? All right.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that's been out there for a long time, and one of the things I think is sort of interesting at this, there's a lot of scrutiny and a lot of discussion about charter schools and school choice at this point, but there's been a law that essentially allows the State Board of Education to effectively overrule local school boards when local school boards turn down charter schools. And that's what happened in a case in Palm Beach County. A charter school applicant went, and the school board said, no, you don't meet our standards or criteria. The school appealed to the State Board of Education, which essentially overruled the local school board. The school board is now trying to get the Supreme Court to take up this issue. They are arguing that the state law that allows give the State Board of Education that authority is unconstitutional. It's been an issue on both sides for a long time. I mean, the charter school operators and the proponents say, school boards, local school boards are obstructionists when it comes to opening charter schools. So they need an avenue of appeal to go to the State Board of Education. That's boiled down, that's sort of what the issue has been. And the school boards, on the other hand, as in this case of Palm Beach County, are saying, charter schools are public schools. They're in our areas. We are charged with running public schools. We need control. So I think it's a pretty interesting issue. It's at a 4th District Court of Appeal earlier this year upheld the law, ruled against the Palm Beach County School Board. Now the Palm Beach County School Board's asking the Supreme Court to get involved. One of their attorneys, I noticed, was Major Harding, a former Supreme Court justice. So it looks like they may be in for, maybe really trying to make a case that this law is unconstitutional. If they are successful, I think it could have a fairly significant impact on charter schools and approval of charter schools in the future.
Well, one thing we know about Supreme Court cases, if they're taken up, is they take a long time. So
the Supreme Court hasn't even decided whether to take this, and the defendants in the case have not even filed an initial brief. So this is really at an initial stage.
Right.
But it is an interesting issue, and there's a lot of focus on school choice and in the state right now, and the House Speaker has been very strong supporter of charter schools and school choice, and a lot of the other Republican leaders have been for a long time as well.
Well, we'll stay tuned. I mean, everything from the Supreme Court to the elections to the legislature to the action going on in the governor's office, it never slows down, does it?
It'd be nice to have a little break.
Right. Well, no breaks in sight for you, so sorry, Jim. All right, so that's all the time we have for today's show. Thanks for tuning in. When you get a chance, check us out on our Facebook page at Capital Dateline Online, or connect with us at Twitter at the FCTA. Thanks for tuning in.